Good afternoon and welcome to this PLUS webinar. My name is Refile Jwala. I'm a researcher at the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies, PLUS, at the University of the Western Cape, South Africa. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Our discussion on women's land rights in Southern Africa today will focus on the gendered implications of the formalization of customary land and look at the silent processes of the registration and privatization of customary land in Mozambique and Zambia. Findings from research projects that we've conducted in the past on land rights demonstrate that Southern Africa continues to be at the center of mounting pressures towards the commercialization of land, water, and natural resources. And while land-based investments by multinational corporations have exacerbated tenure insecurity among the rural poor, especially women, they are not the only important processes affecting land rights. There are state-driven processes to formalize customary land rights as a way to secure land tenure, with a strong emphasis on protecting women's access and use of land. And Alongside this, furthermore, civil society and international donor agencies have capitalized on these new policies to introduce what has been described as flanking mechanisms. These are programs that advocate for registration and customary of rights as a way to protect rural women and the vulnerable from the rise in demand for customary land. Now, on one hand, by helping to register land rights, these programs might protect vulnerable women with insecure tenure from the impact of the growing demand for customary lands across the region. However, on the other hand, these processes can make customary tenure more legible, especially to the markets, and create conditions that are more likely to result in the loss of land. So in today's webinar, my colleagues, whom I will introduce shortly, will be presenting preliminary research findings following our first phase of field work that took place this year in January and February in Mozambique and Zambia. Our main research question for this project is how is the formalization of customary land rights, partly as a response to land grabbing, affecting tenure security, land uses, and livelihoods for rural women, with what implications for policy across the region. This research project, this research that we just undertook forms part of a regional project looking at the privatization of customary land in Southern Africa, in fact, across 4 countries, including Mozambique, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. And we're particularly interested in the implications for women's land rights and livelihoods. We are implementing this project in partnership with civil society organizations, namely Livaningo in Mozambique, and in South Africa, we are working with Nkunzi Development Association that is based in Limpopo, and in Zimbabwe, we are working with the Platform for Youth and Community Development based in Chipinge District in Manicaland Province. And in Zambia, we are working with Zambia Land Alliance, which brings together a range of NGOs at community and national level working on land issues. So for now, please let me introduce you to today's speakers. Joining us is Jacinta Gunda, who's an activist and a program officer at Zambia Land Alliance, and she'll be talking to us about our research findings in Nyimba District in Eastern Province of Zambia. And we are also joined by Clemente Ndawazi, who's a program officer at Livaningo that is based in Maputo, Mozambique. And he's also a postgraduate candidate at PLAS and a youth activist. And lastly, to help us to make sense of these findings and to contextualize these processes of change with in our study sites, to contextualize them within broader agrarian debates. Dr. Pilani Zamchia, who is the project leader and a senior researcher at PLAS, who's written extensively about agrarian change in Southern Africa, will be wrapping up our discussion. So to kick us off, I'm going to be basically the structure of our discussion today. I'll be posing a set of questions to our speakers, and they'll be responding on their respective study sites. To kick us off, I'm going to ask Jacinta, what are the main drivers of formalization of customary land rights? After Jacinta's response, we'll then move on to Clemente. Thank you so much, and please do engage also in the comments section. I hope that you have seen the handles, the Twitter handles for all our partners, as well as our funder for this project, which is the Austrian Development Agency. Our hashtags for today are land tenure and women's land rights. Thank you so much, Jacinta. I will pose the question again. What are the main drivers of formalization of customary land tenure?
Thank you so much, Refil. And I think for us as Zambia Land Alliance, we've observed that the drivers of formalization of customary land is based on the non-legal recognition, first of all, of customary land in our country. Our Constitution and our Lands Act recognizes customary land because Zambia, we have a dual tenure system that is customary and state land. But the challenge that is with customary land is that it doesn't have a legal recognition for one to prove that this land belongs to you. So in that sense, it has become inferior. It's inferior to state land because the law recognizes a title deed as a legal document for ownership. So customary land is inferior to state land because of that basis. So in that sense, we see a lot of human rights violation on customary land because of it being inferior, not being recognized legally. It's mainly affected by development and investments. So a lot of large-scale land-based investment is focused on customary land because state land has the percentage of land has reduced. Maybe it has even finished. So investment is being focused on customary land, and being non-legally recognized, there are challenges that host communities or affected communities face in terms of compensation. Even negotiating for compensation, it's a challenge because they don't have a legal document. And there's a case that I can give in Masaiti where more than 300 community members were displaced to pave way for a water dam project to be constructed. So when it came to compensation, those that had title deeds were given 10,000 kwacha per hectare. But for those that were under customary land, we are only offered 1,300 kwacha per hectare. So you can see the difference. So that's where the inferiority comes in. So the main driver is it's about our law, it not recognizing customary land legally, and also the impact that comes with large-scale land-based investment. That is what is driving this formalization. So we're looking at trying to address the insecurities that come with living on customary land. What can we do? What concepts can we use, or what processes can we use to ensure that these insecurities are addressed, and also that people that are affected by investment are not left out, are not given less compensation. So that is what is driving the formalization of customary land tenure in our country. Thank you, Refil.
Thank you so much, Jacinta, for that. Just to give a bit of context, when you were mentioning that that those who lost land living on customary land only received 1,000 kwacha. That's a little under $100 compared to what recipients living on state land received, which was over 1,000, which was 1,003 kwacha, which is a little over $100 US dollars. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Clemente, who's going to be speaking to us about their findings in Sofala. Clemente, what are the main drivers of formalization of customary land tenure in Mozambique?
Thank you very much, Refilo, and I'd like to greet all viewers. I think the first drive is related to the increase of land-based investments in the country. So it's foreign investors, but also national investors. That at the end of the day, they ended up violating human rights. We conducted this study actually in Nyamatanda district in Sofala province, where, for instance, we found out that Nyamatanda is one of the granary of Sofala province. It has a fertile land, and because of that, it actually benefited one of the governmental program, which is focused on land governance, that is Terra Segura, right, which is going to be implemented until 2024. The third driver I will mention here is actually the increased numbers of conflicts as well among villagers, but also with the investors, right? And the other one has to do with the interest of the government per se to strengthen the land administration system per se. So all actually these elements, the increased numbers of investors, the conflicts that are already happening in the ground, in the communities, in the villages, they actually have called for a land tightening process, which was evidenced in two ways. Where, for instance, the first one was demarcation of village land, and this clearly focused on setting up clear boundaries, and it was mainly implemented by numbers of national non-government organizations. And the second wave, which was attribution of duats for free, actually, and this is really being implemented under the Terra Segura program.
Thank you so much, Clemente, as well as Jacinta. It seems like there's similar processes happening in Mozambique and in Zambia. How would you describe the characteristics and features of the new tenure regimes that are emerging in both countries? You've touched on in terms of how, as activists, organizations, you are working with communities to help strengthen the tenure security. But I'm interested to find out what new features are we seeing? Is there a departure from traditional customary practices? Jacinta? We'll start with you, then move over to Clemente again. Thanks.
Okay. So just to mention that we have different institutions in Zambia that are looking at these different models of securing customary land tenure, and in different chiefdoms. But in the research that we carried out with PLUS early this year, we're going to look at a case in Nyimba district in Eastern Province under Chief Mdake's chiefdom. And this is a Nsenga tribe chiefdom. So the main characteristics of the certification in Chief Mdake's chiefdom doesn't really part away from the traditional norm of holding land. In fact, the customary land holding certificate in this chiefdom has just enhanced the process and the document that was there initially. Because in Zambia, under traditional leadership, the documents that have been given out in the past have been the land records, the farm permits, and also entering of details of the community members in the village register. So these are the documents that have been there, but the challenges that have been there is that they've lacked details. And also in terms of next of kin, who are the members of that family, who is the spouse for the person that is applying for a certificate. So the certification has just enhanced and improved the land administration system. And also that these certificates, they are being given by the chiefdom. There's a committee under Chief Ndake, the Palace Lands Committee that has been set up and supported by Zambia Land Alliance. This committee has got in place application forms. Community members apply by paying 50 kwacha, which is about $2 or $3 to get a form, and then they fill up the form. So the Palace Committee, which is made up of indunas, they go out in the field to confirm on the ground if at all this land belongs to the applicant, and also they have all the neighbors of the applicant in presence, so that they confirm the boundaries. Because as you know, there are a lot of boundary disputes in customary land due to non-availability of beacons and survey maps and all that. So in order to confirm that this land belongs to applicant number A, neighbors should be there. They also append their signatures on the application form. And then there are also guidelines that come with this certificate on how the owner of the land is going to use. The chiefdom has put up guidelines in terms of managing the land well, using the land properly for sustainable use of land. Also, it has got details of the next of kin, the spouse, as well as the children. So these are some of the characteristics. Also that these systems of formalization of customary land are being, it's the chiefs that are in front of pioneering these certificates. So it is a positive on us as Zambia Land Alliance and other CSOs, because we've seen traditional leaders coming up to enhance the security of tenure for their subjects. And also these certificates, they are now being recognized by the council. Like in Nyimba district, the Nyimba district council recognizes and appreciates these certificates because it's helping them to plan the district. Also that our power company, ZESCO, the Zambia Electricity Supply Corporation, whenever a community member wants to connect electricity or even water, they are recognizing these documents. So it's not a way of parting away from the usual traditional land administration system, but they are enhancing the administration system, but also increasing the security issues that community members have been facing. Thank you.
Jacinta, it will also be interesting to find out what this means. What this means also for single women. Clemente, what features are we seeing and new characteristics are we seeing in the case of Mozambique?
Thank you, Rafilo. Actually, what we found out in Yamatanda is that small-scale farmers occupy land through customer norms and practices or good faith because they've been living there for more than 10 years, right? And by the law, they are not required to apply to have any kind of document to prove that they have good rights to use or explore a particular land. Having dual per se it should be a voluntary move. But what we have seen so far, it seems to be an obligation or a condition to secure land per se, in the sense that having unregistered land, it's much weaker than if you have one which is already entitled. For instance, we have seen women in Nyamatanda without duals, where, for instance, have been taken away their lands by local leaders, or others have been taken away by emerging investors in their villages. So I think one of the features I'll mention here is the type of land which is being formalized, right? What we have seen in Nyamatanda is that small-scale farmers acquire land. The duals which they're acquiring is just for the land that they're living in, and not the land where, for instance, they're farming in. And it generally is just to have a minimum of half or a maximum 1.5 hectare. And the question you can raise is here, or the question you can ask is here, how land will be secured then, right? Because if any investor comes right now in the communities, those people will definitely lose their sources of livelihood. And another feature I'll mention is that the new formalization, from my perspective, is not very much gender sensitive, in the sense that there is a gap addressing gender equity. Most of the duals are being registered under the names of husband or a male-related member of a family. We have seen, for instance, I will give an example of one of the villages we visited, which is Siluvu, where, for instance, 800 duals out of 3,000 were registered under women, and most of them were widowers. So this shows clearly that there is that the equity in land right is still a prevailing gap to be addressed in rural areas. And I think there is a need to dismantle the gender gaps on the onset of any land governance program, as I would say. And here we were always constantly, asking ourselves, why are they not giving duals for farmlands? They're just giving duals for the land that they're living in, right? And the consequences actually is if you give just a dual for the lands that they're living in and not the one which they used to farm, it definitely, at the end of the day, going to confine small-scale farmers in small plots, and this would definitely pave a way for a large land-based investments to acquire farmlands, because when they come in the community, they come with the duals.
Thank you for that, Clemente. And I suppose an extension of that question is also to more specifically talk about what type of institutional arrangements we are seeing emerging in terms of the governance of customary land rights. In terms of customary lands across the two countries. But I'm looking at the time, and we need to obviously ensure that we open up for a Q&A session. But before we go to that, can you just speak on what ways do you see emerging for how is formalization protecting or further threatening women's land rights and livelihoods? And what does this mean for land tenure policy in the two countries? I know, for instance, in Mozambique, there's a land policy review process that's underway, and in Zambia, the land policy has still not been adopted. So are these processes protecting or threatening women's land rights, and what does this mean for policy? We'll start off with you again, Jacinta. I'm going to ask you to please keep your responses short so that we can hand over to Dr. Pilan Zamchia. Thank you, Jacinta.
So in terms of enhancing women land rights in Senga Chiefdom, Let me mention that traditionally in Nsenga chiefdom, they hold land through their female lineage, meaning that land is passed on to females. So if a man is married to a Nsenga woman, if there is anything, maybe a divorce or what, that land will still remain in Nsenga land. But what these certificates have done is that they have enhanced, because even when this land is accessed through female lineage, there were challenges that females, women's faced, in that some traditional leaders took advantage of women and they would grab land from them. Even amongst themselves as family members, they would be having disputes and grabbing land from each other, especially from women, knowing that they are weaker part in that. But what has happened now is that they've enhanced now, because they've got their own certificate in their own names and also the details of their children and the next of kin. So if a woman died, it means that the children will also take part. So we are also into the inheritance issue there. So it also protects the rights of the children through that woman. Further, that now women have got a stronger voice to negotiate for a better compensation in terms of large-scale land-based investment because of that document. That document has got the signature of the chief as well as the logo of the chief. Has such, like the Nyumba Council Secretary mentioned, that is authority enough for all the stakeholders to recognize that this is a certificate that is coming from a traditional leader and it should be respected. So women have got a stronger voice now to negotiate for better deals, but also that they can now go and approach even financial institutions to access loans. They are allowed just by using those certificates in order for them to enhance the financial capacity or even their income for them to get into business or even farming, to invest in their farm. If they want to access electricity or water, they have that power to do that. So it has enhanced the rights of women under customary land. And where the council is allocated land by the chiefdom to increase maybe the district or the town, and it is found that there are women or even men that have got these certificates from the chiefdoms, they are given priority by the council. In the past, there would be chests and this land will be allocated to other people, but because of the certificate, it has enhanced their rights. So looking at how this affects land policy tenure in our country, for us, it's a step in the right direction, because Zambia Land Alliance, working together with other CSOs and cooperating partners like PLUS, we've been advocating for enhanced security of tenure under customary land by ensuring that we upgrade the documents, now the certificates that are under customary land, to the same level and authority of a title. And these advocacy issues have been adopted in the draft land policy, which is before the cabinet as we speak. It's one of the provisions that is there. And also to mention that the chiefs under the House of Chiefs have started developing a document which they are calling gender guidelines, guidelines to gender issues. So they are looking at how they are going to enhance gender issues in their land administration and other sectors in their chiefdom. So it's a step in the right direction for Zambia. Thank you.
Clemente, we're moving on to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mafilo. Well, I think it depends on the situation. It really depends on the situation if you look at Mozambique. But what we have seen so far, where we actually conducted our field work, is that women with DUAT is the land title, they feel secure because their land is protected. Those women without DUAT, they want DUAT actually. But most of them, the point is that they really don't know how to get it, and they even didn't know, by the time they were doing the research, they didn't even know whether they can have a joint title or not. Those women with DUAT, which is under their husband's name, they regretted it because they would like to have a DUAT under their names, because or to have it as a joint title, because they claim that they are the one who must work with the land, and they also afraid of losing land if their husband actually passes away, or lose not just land but also other resources. And those women without what actually they feel, and they consider themselves to be marginalized because they really don't know what will happen tomorrow, right? And because they constantly hear that there are investors coming in, and they have heard stories of communities of farmers that have lost lands because of the investors. Some of them actually are also afraid of farmers, of former landowners, because there was no any written agreement. It actually depends. There are situations, there are cases where, for instance, you can see easily that it's really protective in a way that with the doers, they can protect their lands, they can secure their plots. But there are also other cases where, for instance, you don't clearly see it. This picture actually, when the interest of investor or the government interest is higher. And then even with the duals, you might have cases where, for instance, they lose their land.
Thank you, Clemente.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to be handing over now to Dr. Pilan Zamchia, who's going to be wrapping up the discussion for us and linking this to broader agrarian debates, and just providing his input and feedback on these processes following our very fascinating fieldwork and your insights today. Thank you, Pilani. You may go ahead, Pilani.
No, thank you very much, Chairperson. Thank you, viewers. Fascinating discussion from the presenters. I'll just make a few comments across the 4 questions, Chairperson. On the first question, I think the input I would like to make is that formalization, as in the registration and documentation of customary land rights in both Mozambique and Zambia, is panning out in different ways. If you look at Mozambique, the process that you see is actually formalization from above, which can be characterized as high modernism. So you see the might of the state, as Clement was trying to explain, getting to the village level and demarcating land, whether members of the household will be there or not, and just giving people duat for the area where they've got houses, and no duat in areas where they don't have a duat. In areas where they are farming, I mean to say. So if we compare that with Zambia, with Zambia, actually, you are witnessing a process of modernization from below, which is led by the civil society organizations, the traditional leaders, and some community-based organizations, as Jacinda was trying to say. And that process is a little bit more democratic than what is happening in Mozambique. But a fundamental point, a very fundamental point, is that both processes will lead to some version of modernization in the long term, and that the consequences might not be fundamentally different. At the moment, the process in Mozambique is more authoritarian and brutal. In Zambia, a little bit more democratic. But the long-term consequences might be the same in the future. Then, related to these drivers on question 1, I think there's the re-rationalization of the formalization debate using some kind of axioms of the poor people. And I think what we need to discuss, taking a lead from the presenters, is actually that there are contested interests if you hear, from civil society, the civil society, they mean very well, and they are doing it in good faith. And what they want to try and do is to secure property rights for women who have been dispossessed through land grabbing, and for the other rural poor. And they also want to reduce the conflicts they have been witnessing. Jacinda was talking about issues of securing loans and so forth. But when you look at the state's interest, the state's interest is very clear. They just want to formally make the village, give these certificates, and ensure that there's some form of vacant land that is then given to the investors. And that is so clear in Mozambique, as Clemente was trying to explain. So we have also seen this happening even in Ethiopia, where the state ends up creating a land bank, and Tanzania as well. So there's a silent process towards that. That's why you then see that the state just registers the land where people are living and not the land where people are actually farming. Then World Bank, IMF, those are other critical actors with different interests. And you know that the World Bank has lost this debate about formalizing, formal titling to customary land. And this is an opportunity for the World Bank, to allow what they think is a natural process towards formal titling of customary land. And to them, this is less costly, and this produces actually less conflict. And finally, if you look at the rural women who are oppressed, they also see a chance of fighting the patriarchal domination and the patriarchal traditional structures. So we need to dissect all these contested interests because they are not similar. Zambia Land Alliance's interest is totally different from the World Bank's interest in that matrix. Then on question number 2, I think on the characteristics of the new land tenure regime, I think I agree with some of the inputs from the presenters. I just want to emphasize that it is clear that you're not finding the ideal old customary tenure, but at the same time, it's not taking that Western legal notion of property and as envisioned by the evolutionary land rights theorists. So in both countries, Mozambique and Zambia, we are seeing increasing land sales and rentals, but it's not in the way that neoclassical economists would like to debate. And also, these markets are not gender neutral. They are still very much dominated by men. And actually, there's no land that is being transferred to the so-called efficient farmers. What you get are partly the speculators. And however, I want to say a very important point. A very important point is that most women are still accessing land through social tenure in both countries. In Zambia, the systems are less patriarchal compared to Mozambique, but land ownership is still largely a social fact rather than a title deed in both countries, and this is locally legitimated. Rafiwe, you're talking about the institutions of governance. Yes, we're beginning to see some hybrid institutions in both countries. And fundamental also to the changes, for the sake of time, is that this customary land is becoming more legible. Maybe if one would like to look at James Scott, it is very clear that there's this social re-engineering of the rural landscape. And this social re-engineering, I think, is a disastrous attempt at simplification of very complex, multi-layered land rights. And it's making this customary land more manipulable in the future, both economically and politically. Then on the question about the impact, my only input is that there's differentiated outcomes for different social groups of women. In Zambia, yes, a significant number of married women have registered customary land in their own names. But this doesn't always transform patriarchal power relations in decision making on land uses. In Mozambique, married women are not getting the certificate in their own name. And then if you look at the widows in Zambia, they are taking the chance to protect themselves from eviction, as Jacinda said. And the widows in Mozambique, they are getting the duat by default. Then the aspect of conflicts over boundaries. Yes, in Mozambique, from our study site, they have largely reduced. But we need to debate more that this is usually among the less powerful groups. When we have powerful groups like the state in Zambia and also the mining investors, this is also leading to even more conflict. And when you also have the returnees, because what you have now are boundaries. Permanent boundaries, it also becomes problematic. And the young single women are also being left out in both countries. And from what Jacinda was saying, that those with a customary land holding certificate in Zambia are getting priority to services. It can also be viewed from the other lens that marks increased social differentiation, because you have those who have got access to information, to these documents, getting priority in services. So what you are doing there is that they might be further disenfranchisement of those who are already vulnerable. Um, and lastly, Chairperson, I want to say as a way forward, I think it's still very important to note that in both countries, there were strong women voices. There were strong women voices against the formal titling, as in converting customary land to state land because of the cost. And we also observed this in Zimbabwe and in South Africa. And I want to say, if the agenda is to protect the rural poor, I think land tenure reform processes must not be based on the re-rationalization of these neoclassical axioms, but on empirical evidence. And such evidence shows that the majority of rural women are still entrapped. I think I will be persuaded to say that police must still accept the features of customary, land tenure, the features of negotiability, flexibility, and adaptability, which service many vulnerable rural women, but without being blind to social and political differentiation. But for all this to happen, we need governments that are transparent and that are effective. You can't do this with poor states. Thank you, Chair.
Comprehensive wrap up of our discussion and the presentations and your responses to Clemente and Jacinta. And Pilani, your presentation here, your short summary has actually led to a lot of questions here in the comment section. Can we start off with Ben's question that was posed earlier? Does a certificate of customary title specify rights of access to the commons, grazing land, etc.? The discussion so far has focused on residential and arable land. So is the customary land certificate in Zambia, for instance, Jacinta, does that extend into the commons or not? And the same for the duats. Could you please just give short responses to that, as we are running out of time?
Thank you so much. So in our case in Enyimba, so the way the certification is being done is dependent on how much land you have, inclusive of farming, and mostly it's being encouraged for you to have your animals graze within your land. So we also had a case with the Forest Department, who actually shared that the certification has helped to improve the environment, in that now people are not just cutting down of trees anyhow. They are also not using natural resources anyhow, because now they want to protect the environment and their natural resources. But also, let me just mention that as Zambia Land Alliance, we are also encouraging participatory land use planning within customary land. And this is an aspect that is also being thought about by the chiefdom, where they're going to leave these common areas where you can talk about grazing land, talk about firewood collection, but these are typically being done within your piece of land, because people have got more than 1 hectare of land, so they can pick firewood, they can do grazing from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacinta. And Clemente?
Thank you. For the case of Mozambique, what happens is that the current programs, the current land governance programs, actually, they are providing fewer hectares, right? Fewer numbers of hectares. It's just one from half hectare to 1 or maximum 2 hectares, which means that for a farmer who wants a grassland, for instance, will have to apply an individual DUAT. That precisely means to present what they call an investment plan, right? And that's how you will get a DUAT for that particular land. But this way is expensive, because you're going to have to pay for the whole process. So currently, what I know is that from the current program that are being implemented, we don't have that reality, because the DUATs that are being distributed, that are being given in a few numbers of it, less than 5 hectares.
Thank you very much. I see another question here on financial institutions. Chililo's asking, where land rights holders approach financial institutions for loans, do they use customary land as a collateral? If not, what sorts of surety is entered into under such arrangements, where financial institutions are actually willing to extend credit?
The same set. Can I go on?
Please go ahead, Jacinta. Yes.
Thank you. So the same certificate is used as collateral to confirm that this person has got land, but also that we appreciate that this also poses a risk for these small-scale farmers and community members, because they risk losing this land if they default in terms of payment. So there are also other avenues that are coming up. I'll give an example of Chief Chamuka in Central Province in Chisamba District. For him, what he's doing, and this is something that he shared in the House of Chiefs, and they are also considering of maybe taking up this concept, where he had an engagement with all the financial institutions in the district and anyone that would want to work with these subjects. What they've agreed upon, and this is something that they've even appended their signatures, it's an agreement, an MOU between the chiefdom as well as the financial institutions. So what is there is that the chief doesn't want his subjects to give their land as collateral, because they might lose it. So the agreement is that the financial institutions will have to, first of all, through the chief system, to confirm that that person has got land. And then what is given as collateral is any movable assets on the land, and not the land itself. So that is also one way that can be used to protect the rights of community members under customary land. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacinta. Clemente, I'll give you about 2 minutes to respond. I believe it's the same situation under the DUAT, that you can't transfer the land, but the movable assets. Could you please just elaborate on that?
For the case of Mozambique, you cannot use DUAT as a collateral. So far, no way to use a DUAT as a collateral. But of course, there are emerging narratives, right, which are also attaching to the current process of land revision, right, opening up a possibility of using a DUAT as a collateral. And even there are already studies which have been already published. I remember the study which has been recently conducted by the USAID, which actually says that there might be a viable way of using duat as a collateral.
Thank you for that, Clemente. I see here another question from Ruth. She's asking, are activists being captured into a pro-market formalization agenda through the funding on offer? What strategies do they adopt in response? Jacinta, can you please respond? Then we'll hand over to Clemente, and then Philani will wrap up for us on this question.
I didn't understand the question properly.
So she's asking here, in your view, do you think that activists are being captured in this pro-market formalization agenda that, as Philani mentioned in his presentation, that what we saw on the ground is that actually civil society organizations are working in good faith, but we know that behind civil society organizations, especially the national NGOs that like Zambia Land Alliance that may be implementing these programs, they are bigger funding organizations, some of them multilateral institutions that, like the World Bank, like the IMF, that may have, a different agenda in terms of funding programs for titling. So in your view, do you think that activists are being captured in this pro-market formalization, considering that not only does this do these customary land rights certificates on one hand allow for the protection of women's land rights, but on the other also make land legible for markets. So it makes it easier for multilateral corporations and even domestic investors to come in and acquire customary land, which was previously more difficult to because of the channels that are in place for acquiring customary land.
Thank you so much. Yes, I can share the fact that as CSOs, we are doing this in good cause, but also we've received reports that there are certain areas where these formalizations are going on, where also they've employed the technological aspect of it, where they've put up beacons, they've done the survey, but the information and confirmed reports that we have is that actually this information is sent out of the country at international level, and those beacons, they're able to pick out which areas got minerals and all that. So for us, we are doing a good cause, but also we are alive to the fact that there are also other strong systems that are going on to actually privatize the same land, because they're able to capture, especially when it comes to minerals, for them to put all those beacons, they know what is on the ground, and that is opposite to what we're doing as an institution.
Thanks, Jacinta. And that's something we'll need to keep in mind moving forward in the project, how there are competing interests and actors that may be exploiting these programs. Clemente, can you respond in terms of what's happening in Mozambique?
All right. I don't know whether I'm going to use the same expression that Ruth used. The capturization of civil society organizations. I don't know whether that's the words or expression that I'm going to use. What I'm going to say is that in the case of Mozambique, what we have seen is that there's, of course, a numbers of civil society organizations really involved in the process of land titling or land registration, and even mobilization of rural community to accept to do what they see. And this is because there is a recognition, right, that there is a process going on in the country that cannot be ignored. And that process is a massive entrance of land-based investment in the country, and a massive loss of land by small-scale farmers that cannot be ignored. And this is actually also takes their civil society organization to believe that one way we're going to have to accept this move, one way or another we're going to have to accept this move, and in a way to address that should be definitely support or give support on land registration. That is exactly what is happening. But I should actually underline here that the issues of DUAT is highly, very much interested, or highly in the interest of the government per se, of the state, and I'll say international agencies, because the question we always raise is that why will you register? I mean, why will you force small-scale farmer to have a land title, but at the same time you have a law which clearly says that they don't need to have any documentation to prove that they have got the right to use that particular land. And that's the reason why we actually say that this is really on the interest of the government, on the interest of international agency and so forth.
Thank you so much, Clemente, for highlighting those contradictions. We're going to try to squeeze in one last question here that was posed in the comments section by Ruth, and she's asking, are there plans in your respective countries for individuals within communities to receive titles rather than certificates to apportion community land?
For Zambialand Alliance, we've been discouraging titles on customary land because that has got an effect in that it's going to reduce the powers and authority of customary land, but also that even the traditional leaders themselves now, they've come up, they are not for that idea. I've been sitting in their meetings when they discuss around the draft land policy, and they've made that a point that they do not want any title. That's why even them, they are also for enhancing security of tenure under customary by just improving the document and giving it the authority that it deserves. So yes, as an individual, a person has got a right to decide. But we give information, the pros and cons of having land under state or customary, but also it's up to the traditional leaders on what they want. So we have got these stakeholders that have got different interests.
Thanks, Jacinta. Indeed, the conversation around titles brings about like a whole range of new narratives and competing interests that would need to be accounted for in our debate and also in the research. Clemente, any response on the question around titling in Mozambique? Where, I mean, land is held by the state.
Yes, well, I don't know whether in the context of Mozambique, we're going to say community land or not. I always struggle, and I always used to say that I don't think we can say in the context of Mozambique, it's right. I don't think it's right to say community land because land per se, according to law, it belongs to the state, and the community, what they do is simply they hold the right to use or explore a particular land. What happens actually is that an individual, of course, in villages, they can acquire. I mean, they can request an individual do it. For instance, particular areas where they want to invest and so forth. But as I said, it goes with you or with an individual to request and to do a formal request. And also to present an investment plan and so forth. So for community per se, what happens is that a community can have a certificate, right? It can have a certificate which shows the clear, which makes a clear boundaries, right? It just shows the clear boundaries. Your community starts from here and ends from point X, right? And for individual exploitations, individuals are allowed to get the title individually. That can be possible to get it.
Thank you so much. We don't have a lot of time left. I'm going to give each of our speakers 30 seconds just to give us their final comments and remarks and questions for our ongoing research moving forward. And we'll definitely take some of the questions that have been raised in the comments section also into account. Jacinta, I'm going to give you actually 20 seconds.
Thank you. For us, it's about enhancing and improving security of tenure for customary land, and also enhancing security of tenure for women land rights. And that's why we are advocating that security of tenure for customary land is taken as a provision in the draft land policy. And then later on, when the policy is adopted, we're going to sit down again and then look at how customary land is going to be managed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Clemente?
I just want to emphasize one of the points that I left out is that, of course, the word cannot be used as a collateral in Mozambique, but what happens is that those small-scale farmers, for instance, that are under sustenta and that have got to do it, they are more in a situation of getting funds, right? Not just from sustenta, but from any other programs, right? And this is actually a way or strategy that the government is using to enforce, I would say, to force small-scale farmers to do it. So what I think is that in terms of, I think there's the land tenure per se, theoretically, actually, it does protect women land rights, but this is not translated into practices or at the village level. So there is a gap that really needs to be filled, and by the civil society organization, by the government, per se, and the other interested stakeholders. So dissemination and co-touching process could be one of the perhaps one of the contribute to promoting women land rights.
Thank you so much, Clemente. Philani, your concluding comments?
Thank you very much, Chair. Unfortunately, we didn't have time. I wanted to make reference to Benny and Ruth's good points about commons and capture. But my last input is that I think formalization, it seems to protect, the rural poor, if we look at it at the surface. But underneath, if we dissect it underneath, I think it can be used to legitimize a process of dispossession by formalization by the state, all powerful state, by the donors and the investors. And since this was our preliminary fieldwork, those are the issues that we will look into detail more when we return for the second phase. I really appreciate the questions. They've enriched our thinking. Thank you, Rafiu.
Thank you so much to our speakers, and I'd also like to thank everyone who's joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it, and like I said, we really appreciate all your comments and questions, as they will really feed into our ongoing research process and help us to think through these issues as they emerge. I just wanted to also share a reminder about a special webinar that PLUS will be hosting tomorrow at the same time from 1 to 2. The webinar will be looking at the military dictatorship and citizenship in Myanmar. And we'd really appreciate it if you could join during your lunchtime tomorrow. Thank you again, and take care, everyone.
Thank you.